for joining with
Hello.
us. And Mr. Yasa, Pak Yasa?
Ya, halo.
Oke, Yasa juga sudah bergabung bersama dengan kami. Kita akan berdiskusi bersama-sama. But the first questions, I will go to Charu. In this condition, in the midst of the threat of stagflation and recession that haunts the world, it turns out that there are areas where the economy is safe from turmoil. The Asian Development Bank, ADB, sees developing countries in Asia continuing to recover despite the risk of slowdown, including Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, also Philippines, and Cambodia. What are the reasons for the economic resilience of the region?
I think for this particular economic cycle, we have certainly seen that most of the Asian economies have been extremely resilient compared to the past tightening cycles of the Fed. In terms of FX resilience, I think it comes a little bit from their stronger balance sheet, stronger FX reserves. But when you look at it from the economic growth perspective and the risks of stagflation that you have pointed out, I think there is more fragmentation in the Asian space, I would say. Indonesia, Malaysia, of course, have been more resilient, continued because of their strong commodity exports, and the commodity prices going higher certainly helped with their trade balances. But while on the other side, generally for the region, it's been, the recovery from the pandemic and the reopening demand, which kind of underpinned strong demand recovery domestically for many economies. Whereas the one you pointed out about Vietnam, I think that's also very interesting and a very different story, particularly because, Vietnam has now become like the factory of the world, especially after China is trying to transition away from this low-cost manufacturing and focus more towards the consumption side. So I think with that, Vietnam has really been the biggest beneficiary of those supply chains moving out of China. And I think that has really underpinned the recovery in Vietnam.
Okay, how about in 2023? What the Asian regions faces in 2023? What is the challenge?
There will be several challenges for the Asian economies because we don't see that the Fed tightening is over yet. Fed tightening is actually going to continue into the next year as well. And even after they reach those terminal rates that they are expecting to, they're likely going to hold rates there and not start easing immediately after that. So because of that, I think the liquidity pressures are going to stay, and that will continue to be a major headwind for Asian economies. But I do see some bright spots, particularly Indonesia and Vietnam, as we just discussed. But I would also like to probably highlight India, where, of course, the demographic are extremely positive, and with this rapid urbanization, middle class growing, we do see that the demand picture certainly is looking very good. But at the same time, a lot of portfolio flows are going into India as a lot of funds withdraw from China. So of course, India becomes the beneficiary of that movement as well, because of its deeper markets. And there's also a lot of push on production. So now Apple is starting to produce iPhones in India. So I think that again, the push on production is going to be the next step forward for India as well.
Now we talk about oil price. Oil price will soar after OPEC's policy of productions and the existence of hawkish fat policy has triggered inflations. How is the resistance of currency exchange in the Asia Pacific regions?
Yeah, in fact, oil prices have drivers beyond OPEC as well, with, the US kind of thinking of pausing the release from its strategic reserves, and also, a lot of these EU sanctions coming into place later this year on Russian oil. So, of course, the tightness in the oil markets is going to be a key concern for the Asian markets, because most of the Asian countries are importers of oil. I think for the bigger countries that we just discussed, they will still possibly wade through this crisis, although, a costlier oil in a weaker currency does weigh on their balances. So it will be somewhat of a headwind, but it is a global headwind, and potentially a stronger domestic demand, can help to offset some of these external headwinds. But I think it is a major issue for those smaller countries which do not have enough financing power. And we've seen that crisis kind of play out in Sri Lanka earlier this year as well. So I do think a lot of those smaller emerging markets in Asia will likely be more exposed to this dynamic. One of the tail risks that I really see to this would be that some of these economies could potentially turn to Russia to get their oil. Myanmar was already in talks with Russia to get that oil and pay for that in rubles. So that's a key risk scenario, because that could certainly weigh on that dollar-based financing trends in the region. The trade finance could take a step backwards.
After we talk about oil price, now inflations too, concerns about it, stagflations and massive inflations are a concern for financial market investor. Which country will be hit by a recession to stagflations due to high inflations? How do you see about it?
I think inflation in Asia has been largely contained this time. I mean, it hasn't been such a big issue, but now with Indonesia kind of removing the subsidies that it had in place to kind of bring its fiscal balances in store a little bit better held, I think it will mean that inflation will shoot up in countries where domestic demand is also strong, where we see this reopening demand being really strong, and where is the most domestic demand in the region? Of course, it's in India, where we have seen inflation being a big problem, not just during the pandemic or during this commodity price gains, but in the last 3-4 years, India inflation hasn't come back to the targets that the RBI has wanted it to be in. Indonesia's inflation has been, of course, pretty much more contained in Bank Indonesia's target range, but of course now it is breaking out of that range as well because of that domestic demand being very strong, plus that removal of subsidies as well. Similarly, I think we will see these trends shaping out in Philippines, in Malaysia as well. Where is inflation more controlled? In Japan and in China, where they still have those COVID restrictions as well.